I'm Dan Kleppner, and a relatively new member of this group. Charlie Holbrow told me about it last fall, and I went to a number of meetings then. Every year at Christmas time, my wife and I fly out to California and stay in California till the end of March. However, things have changed, so I'm still in California. We're living in Menlo Park, right next to Stanford University. And yes, it is beautiful here. But I'm very happy to offer this presentation. I hope it's of some interest. It was certainly interesting to me. Let me explain who I am. I am a professor emeritus of physics at MIT. So my background quickly is that I graduated from Williams College and Cambridge University and got my PhD with Norman Ramsey at Harvard University. My PhD was on atomic clocks, really on the hydrogen maser. And so for the early part of my career, I was very much involved with atomic clocks. I went to MIT in 1966 and have worked in atomic, molecular, and optical physics on such things as Rydberg atoms, the search for the Bose-Einstein condensation, and such. And yes, I have more than my fair share of medals, but I won't labor that any more than to say that. This study has really nothing to do with my own professional expertise, just my expertise as a physicist. And in 2001, I was asked to join a study group to analyze this proposed missile defense system called Boost Phase Intercept. And we worked on that quite hard for about 2 years. And what I'm going to do is to show a presentation of the study itself. But before that, I'd like to talk a little bit about the background of missile defense. That could be an extensive series of talks if one wanted to labor it. But basically, when the Second World War was coming to its end, there was increasing concerns about civil defense. The discovery of Sputnik in 1957 really changed everything. It was clear then that it would be possible to make ballistic missiles. A ballistic missile simply means a missile which goes into orbit, not completely around the Earth. It just goes from one side to anywhere you want and comes down. And work started on systems for defending against these ballistic missiles. There were a number of early systems were started. The one which got furthest was called the Nike system. And you may remember, if you ever noticed the missile defense antennas and apparatus, which one could see driving up Route 128 north of Route 20 in the Waltham area. There's a high hill, and there was a Nike base right there. They had intercept missiles grounded there. The Nike system was huge. It was a local system, local in the sense that you're defending each area separately. The major cities in the United States had Nike defenses around them. Boston actually had 15 of those Nike bases. The whole country had something like 225 Nike bases. I mean, these were elaborate installations. And it became clear eventually that they were no good. They were to defend missiles as they were incoming in the last phase of their fight, about 20 or 30 seconds between the time they plunge into the atmosphere and hit the Earth. And it was evident that they would not do the job. They just couldn't respond quickly enough or accurately enough. And there were two developments in missiles which put an end to the Nike system. The first one were the MIRVs, M-I-R-V, multiply independently targeted reentry vehicles, that a missile could send out 6 or 7 warheads in different directions to different targets, and you would have to get all of them. So just the problem of knowing where they were going and getting the information around was prohibitive. Beside that was the even tougher problem. In ballistic phase, everything moves at the same speed. So a missile can easily deploy dummy warheads that you couldn't distinguish from the real ones. You have a whole slew of these things coming in. So it became more and more evident that the Nike system was not much use, and in 1974 it was actually discontinued. Work continued on trying to intercept missiles in their cruise phase. That is, while they were still flying. You have about 20 to 30 minutes of flight time in which to get your information and choose your ground interceptor. But that also turned out to be a more daunting problem than people had expected. The problem, the MIRV problem continued, and the dummy warhead problem was very evident there. In 1981, when Reagan was elected president, he was taken to see the radar systems we had for identifying missiles. These were very highly developed. You could see missiles very far off. There's a center in Colorado that he was taken as a presidential visit, and they were very proud at how easily they could identify the incoming missiles. And Reagan asked, well, what do you do about it? And they said, well, there's nothing to do about it. We just know they're coming. And that upset Reagan very much. And so he started the current phases of missile defense. Well, I was starting with the prologue, and that was it. So in 81, Reagan becomes president. He learns that, excuse me, we are defenseless. And he did something about it. He came up with a new strategy for countering the ICBM threat. At the time, the only strategy was mutually assured destruction, MAD. Namely, if the Russians sent a missile to us, we'd send a missile to them. And we were both sane countries and wouldn't do that. But the idea of mutually assured destruction, it's not a defense mode, it's a retaliation mode. So a couple of years later, he addressed the missile threat. Reagan proposes US's new way to block missiles. He looks to use of technology to replace the old doctrine of massive retaliation. The proposal was to develop weapons which were in space all the time and could hit targets anywhere on Earth, essentially instantly. You know, a super laser, an X-ray laser would do that. And this program itself it proposed a whole series of new weapons: chemical lasers, charged energy particle beams, X-ray lasers, and technically it was called the Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, which is immediately known as Star Wars, which was a really appropriate name for it. Now, there was very little information about these new systems. There were promises. Edward Teller promised that you could make an X-ray laser the size of an office desk, which would capable of shooting down a missile anywhere on Earth. Well, there was not very much information about these, and the American Physical Society discussed the situation and decided that they ought to carry out a study to provide some reasonable public information about whether these new systems were really practical. So they commissioned a study. The co-chairs were Niccolo Bloomberg at Harvard University and Kumar Patel. These were both very distinguished scientists. Bloomberg later won the Nobel Prize for really creating nonlinear optics. Kumar Patel was the inventor of the nitrogen laser. And they put together a very distinguished group, and they studied it. And the conclusion of the report was that none of the proposed SDI techniques was feasible. It's an interesting report to review or to see. There's the reference on it. The executive summary goes through each one of the proposed techniques and basically says by how many powers of 10 these things fell short of reality. The best was 1 power of 10. Many of them were 2 or 3 powers of 10. So this really put an end to the SDI program. Nonetheless, work on developing missile defense based on intercepting in the ballistic phase, mid-course interceptor was called, continued. But it became increasingly discouraging just because of these problems of multiple warheads and the problems of dummies. So the SDI was actually concluded under, I guess Clinton brought it formally to an end. It was just withering, so it was just stopped, but work continued. But these problems of the problems facing mid-course defense continued. And then, well, these are the problems I've talked about. There was a proposal to overcome those problems. Now, Bush was elected president in 2000. In 2000, at the end of the year, he gave his first cabinet appointment, which was Colin Powell. This is a transcript of his comments at the time. This is in the New York Times in the good old days when they published full transcripts of people's comments. I happened to hear his talk, so this rang a bell with me. And I was rather curious because he commented on missile defense. Now, he was presented as the new Secretary of State. You would think the new Secretary of State would not be talking about military defense. But these are what he actually said, which caught my ear. I watched the debates for national missile defense for many, many years, and I think a national missile defense is an essential part of our overall strategic force posture. And the question was just what was the new defense which was going to overcome the objections. Well, it's a strategy called Boost Phase Intercept. Boost Phase Intercept is a strategy for disabling the missile before it's gotten into orbit, while it's still accelerating. It can't deploy any dummy warheads then. And if you could do that, that would be a sound defense. Now, little was known about Boost Phase Intercept, essentially nothing. There was one article in July 2001, the previous July, and it explained the rationale very clearly. It's intercepted in the boost phase when it's moving relatively slowly and before it can launch decoys. The disadvantage, it must be deployed quickly, leaving no time to call Washington. Okay? There was essentially no other public information that we could find about that. So once again, the Physical Society thought that it had an obligation to the public to provide technical information. And they established a working group, and I was co-chair of that working group. So what I'm going to talk about is how Boost Phase Intercept would work if it could work. The only other information, there just wasn't any. So here's a huge new national initiative taking place, and nobody in the public knows how to judge it. So the following spring, the study group was organized and it was published in 2004. Now, we only study the technical issues involved. When you start talking about missile defense, one normally jumps to the issues of the strategic issues. Are they justified? Does it make sense to have missile defense? We didn't discuss that at all. I don't know how people on the committee judge the desirability of having such a system. So it's purely technical report. And this is from the presentation we put together on the report to show it to the community. My co-chair, Fred Lamb, was an astrophysicist at the University of Illinois. And the full report is available. There's a reference down below. It's the Review of Modern Physics, and it was published in 2004. So, first of all, you have to decide just who you're defending against. This is a local defense. In fact, one of the advantages of Boost Phase Intercept is that if you're going to have a defense, say, against North Korea, it's not going to affect Russia's, the Soviet Union's capabilities. It's a local defense. It's very specific. You have to know who the adversaries are. And for that, the official National Intelligence Council identified the major threat to the U.S. to be the axis of evil. That was a term that was coined by them, but the axis was Iran, Iraq, and North Korea. So there were three nations that we had to worry about. There are two types of ICBMs, and they have very different capabilities, at least very different from our point of view. Liquid propellant missiles, their burn time is 4 to 5 minutes. The solid propellants, burn time is 2 to 3 minutes. Now, 2 to 3 minutes means you may have 2 minutes from the time the missile is launched and you have to intercept it. So that means working very, very quickly. And the whole gist of this was to find out whether one could get to the missiles in time. And here are the phases of missile flight. The boost phase is maybe 3 to 4 minutes. That's for a liquid one. Mid-course is about 20 minutes. The terminal, which Nike was aimed at, is the last 40 seconds. Okay, we studied kinetic kill weapons, which were based on land, sea, and air. Kinetic kill simply means that you kill by the energy of the interception. You might think that if you're going to have an anti-missile system, you'd like to have a lot of high explosive aboard to blow it up. But there's no point, because the kinetic energy of the collision is much, much higher than any chemical load you could carry with you. So it's just called kinetic kill weapons. And they can be on the land or on ship, or they could be launched from the air. We also studied kinetic kill weapons based on satellites. You can think of a system of satellites with these interceptors on them. And we analyzed such a system. And there was one directed energy weapon which actually did proceed to development from the SDI program. It's called the Airborne Laser. This was a program of the Air Force, and was highly developed when we undertook our study. Yeah. Okay, here is what you need to worry about. Here are some missiles being fired from North Korea to the United States. The times for the interception are shown on there. Basically, they take less than 4 minutes to get to North America and maybe 20 seconds to cross it. So what one wants to do is to knock them down there. So those are the trajectories, and there's several trajectories. You have to be able to defend against all three of them. Each of these trajectories has its own time scale. And here we go from Iran to the United States. It takes, with a solid propellant missile, it takes less than 3 minutes to cross the country. So you need to knock them down there. Here is a little diagram which helps one understand the intercept. You have an ICBM which is launched at some point, and it goes up and goes into its ballistic trajectory. It may become ballistic, say, at that point. You're some distance away, and you have missiles that you want to aim at it. Now, the speed that you can muster in this is terribly important. The faster you can go, the sooner you can get to it. It's essential to get to it before then, because at that point, it's in orbit. It can launch its multiple warheads and decoys. These green lines here show 3 missiles that are the same as these blue lines, except these have been delayed for 30 seconds, and I'll explain just what that delay means. Here is another picture. This is the missile going into orbit. Here's the interceptor firing point. It can go that far. It can go, it can be located anywhere within the circle if it has with the speed and intercept. So if this is your interceptor, the ground-based area in which you must locate it is simply that circle. Now, this shows the real nub of the problem. It's a time scale. You detect these missiles from monitors sitting in geosynchronous orbits. They're constantly looking at the ground, and if you fire a missile, you're going to make light, and you'll see a point of light on the ground. But it could be anything. It could be an oil well exploding, or an accident, or a fire of some sort. You don't yet know that it's a missile. You have to watch it for a little while. And what it does in that time is it starts moving. So if it starts moving, you know you'll have a candidate for an attack. But you've got to know how it's moving. In order to intercept the orbit, you have to know what the orbit is. So you have to watch for a little while to know on what orbit is before you can send out your interceptor. That's not much time. For a liquid propellant missile, it's about, I don't know, 65 seconds. For the solid ones, it's less than 60 seconds. Now then you have a problem. It's less than 60 seconds. You've decided that, yes, it is a missile. The question is, are you really sure? You'd like to call Washington to say, should we fire? But you have up to 30 seconds to do that. So you don't call Washington. The president may be not available. You have to make that decision on your own. And the question is, how long do you want to take to make sure that this war you're about to start is going to be worth the effort? Well, we had scenarios where we've allowed up to 30 seconds of decision time. Now, the ICBM burns out in 120 seconds, but if you have 30 seconds of decision time there, you only have 90 seconds in which to reach it, launch your defense missile and get to it. Liquid propellant ICBMs are a little bit easier because they take longer. If you decide instantly, you have a bit under 3 minutes. If you give yourself a little time to think it over and decide whether you really want to start a war, you have 140 seconds. So those are the time frames which you have to meet. And the question is, can you do it? Well, you have to worry about the ICBMs in powered flight. They can accelerate unpredictably. You may know generally where it's going, but you may not know the orbit that precisely. So your homing in missile has to be able to track it very quickly and follow it. And things are moving very fast at this very high speed. And then the geographical constraints require high interceptor speeds. They're likely to be 400 to 1,000 kilometers from the intercept point. So it's a rush, can you get there? Our approach. Well, we've adopted the threat estimates from the National Intelligence Estimates and congressional testimony by the National Intelligence Committee staff. So we wanted to make sure that we were defending the right things. We made generally optimistic assumptions in the sense we assumed that we'd have technologies which, if not available right now, were clearly coming within 10 years. We set aside any problem except the problem, can you get to it in time? You have to worry about battle management and communications and countermeasures and such. We didn't discuss those things. We discussed the bare bones problems which can decide whether or not such a system is feasible. Okay. And it involved constructing computer models of the missiles, the missile tracking systems, the interceptors, and kill vehicles. And we carried out simulations to determine the required performance. Now, somewhere in here, maybe later on I can retrieve it, I had a list of the members of the committee. There were about 12 members of the committee, and these were experts from the missile defense companies, from the federal government, and just physicists. So they're very well qualified to do this. The computer modeling of missiles and of the not only the missiles and the interceptors. It was a highly developed art. So this was a grounds-up analysis of the system. We carried out simulations. Okay. So let's start at the ground. Here is an interceptor being, this orbit is called a maximum range orbit. This is the first stage. At this point, there's the second stage. The third stage is essentially the kill vehicle. When the second stage fires, you can actually change direction of the orbit. It's called the dog leg. So instead of going there, you're going up here. You can also go into an orbit which isn't the shortest orbit between the 2 points. It can take longer, but it goes much higher. It gets you out of ground range more quickly, like that. And it will pass through that area there. So to defend against this missile, you'd like to be somewhere in these areas. This is the dog leg. The burnout, this one is a liquid missile, 170 seconds. The acceleration of these interceptors has to be furiously high. For a solid propellant missile, this is the first stage. It cuts out at about 10 G, and then second stage accelerates with another 10 G, and this is the interceptor missile there. The interceptor itself has furiously high acceleration. It has a first stage of going up to 30 G and then up to, over 60 G. The reason you need such high acceleration isn't just that you need high speed, but you need to get to the high speed very quickly. So with the given acceleration, the time it takes to reach a speed decreases as the acceleration increases. Well, now, much of the energy here is in understanding the kill vehicle, the very last stage. How does it track in on the, how does it track the threat missile? One of the points which is made by people talking about the system is that in the boost phase, you have a huge plume, so it's very easy to see the missile. Well, it isn't easy to see the missile, it's easy to see the plume. The plume can be kilometers long. The missile itself is a very small object at the tip of the plume. So the plume isn't really of much help at all. You have to be able to home in on the missile. Not only do you have to home in on the missile, you have to really home in on the warhead of the missile. If you have, for instance, a liquid propelled missile and send your killer at it, it'll just go right through it, punch a hole on each side. The pressure will drop a little bit. The missile will go slower, but you haven't destroyed it. You don't destroy it unless you hit the warheads. And this means a target which is of the order of a meter in diameter. So that's a pretty tough goal, but you can do it. You use all sorts of things. You use, well, sensors, optical UV sensors, and LiDAR. You have to have what's divert capability, namely you have to be able to accelerate in different directions very rapidly. And you need extremely fast guidance and control and dynamic response. Kill vehicles with these capabilities would be relatively heavy, I mean, relatively 90 to 140 kilograms. This means your interceptors, which need to be very fast and need to be very, well, they just need to be very fast. And the speed goes right up with the size of the interceptor. We studied three. One which intercepts at 5 kilometers per second, another one which reaches 6.5 kilometers per second, and then one which hits at 10 kilometers per second. The higher the speeds, the easier the task. This is a person standing just for scale. These are huge. These are approaching the Saturn size. So these were not strictly existing interceptors, but the ones which were close to existing ones and ones which we know were feasible. So we felt that these were reliable models to use in our modeling. Now, the time constraints, well, one is you don't really know that the thing is an attack missile when it's coming. A weather satellite launching missile and a threat missile have very much the same profile. It's not until the very last stage that you know exactly where it's going. So if you're going to have this boost phase defense, you're vetoing the threat nation's ability to fire any missiles at all, which might be a problem. But we just pointed out the problem. We didn't consider its implications. Well, so now let's look at a real case. By far the most favorable country to defend against is North Korea, and the reason is because you have the sea next to it. The best place to launch these missiles is from a ship. So you can have ships in the Sea of Japan. And here are azimuths for three different goals. This is a goal to Hawaii. It goes right across the ocean. This would be ideally for defending, but North Korea may not very well want to defend Hawaii. They might choose San Francisco, which would be the easiest, or Boston, or any place in between. And one wants to be able to eliminate the threat of all of these azimuths. So if we have a 5 kilometer per second interceptor, and if you're willing to fire it with no delay at all, it has to be in this solid circle. No, I'm sorry, I've got that backwards. It lies within this larger circle here. If you want 30 seconds to think it over, it has to be within the shaded circle. And that is the actual intercept point that one's aiming for. So if you have a ship at sea in this area here, you can have a good defense. This is the easiest defense. It's if North Korea decides to attack Fairbanks, Alaska, which doesn't seem like a very sensible thing to do. If they want to hit Boston or some other place in the States, then if you have, this is a 6.5 kilometer per second interceptor. This is one of the larger ones. And you're willing to intercept immediately with no delay. You have to be in this circle. And presumably you could have ships in this area. You can even have ships in this area, but North Korea doesn't like ships close to the coast and would probably object. Now, that was assuming that North Korea was using an old-fashioned liquid-propelled missile. Our belief was that within 10 years, they certainly have solid-propelled missiles, and then it becomes much more difficult. There's no possibility to protect Alaska, in this case here. you just can't be close enough. United States and Boston, you have some possibilities, but it's a rather slim one of keeping ships right here. That's not very favorable. And that's for a solid ICBM with 6.5 kilometers per second. If you put in the great big baby, which has 10 kilometers per second, there'd be no opportunity. Yeah, this is the 10-kilometer one, and you would have to be within this area over here if you're going to have any discretionary time. So let's look at Iran. From Iran has very different azimuths depending on whether you're aiming for, say, Boston or Washington. They're the same azimuth, or San Francisco. You'd have to have your interceptors somewhere here. Now, there is room for a Navy here. This is the Caspian Sea. Unfortunately, the Caspian Sea is landlocked, so there's no opportunity. You could perhaps have some interceptors in Turkey, but again, they're marginal. They give you no discretionary time, and as a matter of policy, you don't really like to rely on other countries. I mean, for instance, Turkey might not be available for your sites. If they use the 10-kilometer per second interceptor, the only water nearby is in the Caspian Sea. Otherwise, you'd have to be in Iran itself, which undoubtedly would not cooperate on that. And the sea isn't available. So basically, the conclusion was that you can't use Boost Phase Intercept against Iran. Yeah, here is what, if you have two ground bases, things become a little bit easier. You have more room in Turkey. But with a solid base, you're still stuck. Now, a way around those problems is to have your interceptors based in space. And there was a good deal of talk about space-based missile defense. You have to have quite a few in space, though, if you're going to give complete coverage of the Earth everywhere all the time. Well, the threat nations, anyway, all the time, because you're only over them for a very brief time. So you have to have quite a few of these. Here is a little graph of the results. This line here is the number of interceptors you would need to give coverage, depending on their mass and depending on the range that you want. But the number of interceptors that we're talking about is shown here. You know, this goes up to 20,000. You're going to need thousands of them to get the coverage that you want. So our conclusions on space-based intercept is that you need a huge number of interceptors, 1,600 interceptors for a minimum mass in orbit of 2,000 tons, which would be a 5 to 10-fold increase in annual US space launch capability. So the conclusion of that, I think any reasonable person would say this is science fiction. The third system that we looked at was the Airborne Laser. This was the system developed by the Air Force. So we made some assumptions about the capabilities based on the Air Force information. It was a 300 kilowatt laser in a beam about a meter in diameter. That beam would be focused by a very high quality optical system onto the surface of the laser. With that, it would take about 20 seconds to disable the laser. And that, of course, depended upon the power of the laser, whether it was using a liquid or solid. Oh, I'm sorry. This is on the missile itself. 32 megajoules per square meter for a liquid one. Solids are much harder to knock out. You need a 240. But it's very attractive because it's up there all the time, and anything coming up, you just knock it down. So we looked at the grounding conditions for that. That airborne laser would have to be inside of this circle in order to defend Boston. Well, most of the time it's over Korea or Russia, which doesn't seem too desirable. And for Iran, it's over Iran all the time, so that's impossible. We ourselves had very grave doubts about the capability of that laser. These were the Air Force goals, but we knew that it had gone through a lot of development and was not reaching those. And in fact, it never did. It was just dropped shortly after our report came out. Another problem that you don't normally think about is that if you disable the missile, you can slow its speed, but it'll continue on a course and it'll come down somewhere before the intended spot. If you're heading for Dallas, it could come down anywhere in the United States. There, it could come down in Canada. In San Francisco, you're pretty safe. It'll land at sea. One doesn't normally think about this. You just think that the disabled missile is destroyed, but it really isn't destroyed. If you were to use it against Iran, it would come down somewhere on Western Europe, and you'd have to decide whether you want to have it come down on France or Great Britain or Spain. However, that boost phase wasn't viable. Also, although we didn't discuss countermeasures, there's one very obvious one. All defense systems have countermeasures. For Boost Phase Intercept, the leading countermeasure is just launch a salvo of ICBMs. In fact, it'd be very foolish not to launch several ICBMs at the same time. ICBMs aren't all that reliable. You don't want to just send one and have it misfire. You've got to make sure that you send enough so that one can get through. So you will be launching against a salvo of ICBMs. We didn't analyze that. We just mentioned that. So the report is really pretty negative on the boost phase system. Before we released the report to the public, well, it was very carefully reviewed within the American Physical Society, which has a lot of very capable reviewers. It was briefed to the Missile Defense Agency. We did that just because you don't want to really come with a showstopper with no advance notice, so they would have no way to respond. So we gave them a presentation, and they were very interested in our presentation. We realized the reason for that was they had never done such an analysis themselves. Now, that was sort of staggering realization, at least to me. But the reason is quite simple. When Bush announced the Boost Phase program, which he did with Colin Powell's little talk, that became what's called a presidential initiative. A presidential initiative is a direction to an agency to carry out some task. That's what the executive does, tells the agency what to do. At that point, the agency is supposed to do it. They're not supposed to start out and asking the president, well, do you really want to do that? Is this what we really need? You just start it. There was a very clear example of that when Bush declared the Mars mission. It was done with no reviews at all. It was done really for political purposes. But NASA immediately had to respond. The first response was to cancel a mission to monitor the Earth's energy output, continually from space, because they had to start something that affected their budget. So presidential initiatives can be very destructive. So anyway, that's the reason the Missile Defense Agency was so interested in our study, we believe, because we had done no such study themselves. Well, shortly afterwards, there was an article in the Washington Times. Let me see. Yeah. It made the point, growing realization that the project will absorb too much of the missile defense budget in future years and turn agency focus from deploying defense to costly futuristic technologies. They may have come to that conclusion not just from reading our report, but from reading a Congressional Budget Office study, Alternatives for Boost Phase Missile Defense, which was prepared pretty quickly after our own report came out. And they analyzed it from a budgetary point of view. Now, the CBO is one of the good institutions which continues untarnished today. It provides analysis of the cost of programs for both the House of Representatives and the study and the Senate. And it has a great reputation for accuracy and integrity. And the fact that the Washington Post article echoed this statement that it would be prohibitively expensive echoes the CBO study. The CBO did do its own study. Their results were essentially the same as ours. They made some different assumptions and slightly different results. So the fact was that there was no discussion there. The defense was not possible. There are comments from the physics community too. Some of our colleagues, including Richard Garwin, who is the most respected federal advisor. He's a great scientist and an ideal advisor. Now, the question is, it's now in 2020, have things changed? What do we have for nuclear deterrence? We have submarines all around the world carrying nuclear-tipped missiles, which could be fired almost instantly and reach any goal, anywhere, anytime. It's mutually assured destruction. So that's what our safety rests on today. These are hair trigger systems. They're both in the Navy. Probably these military systems are more secure than ground-based systems, but there are ground-based systems now. A number of nations have them. Most recently, North Korea developed this. And their ground-based systems are liable to errors and mistakes. Mistakes have almost happened in the past. It's a very discomforting situation. So that's where we are. That's the end of the presentation, and in doing this, I realized that in shuffling my slides last night, I made some changes I hadn't really intended. So I would like to just go back and I'd like to show who the members were. I regret not having the two things. One is the list of people on the committee. It's available in the report, and I did give a reference on the report. One person who was particularly valuable was Dave Montague, who is a computer scientist. He has his own company, but he had worked for a long time for Boeing Missiles Division, who is a real expert and who did the analysis of the kill vehicle, whether it could get there in time. It involved very sophisticated modeling and was a very thorough job, and it's all spelled out in the report. You'll recognize some of the other names on the report.
Do you want him to help you with this?
No.
No?
No, it's okay.
Okay.
One of them on it was Roger Falcone, who's the head of the Optical Society one year, and a very gifted laser scientist. So we had scientists at that level on the study. And looking back on it now, the study, I think, was useful. It was a useful national service because we'd be spending huge amounts of money on that system, I think, if our study hadn't come out. But it's discouraging that our international relations haven't been improved, that we're still incapable, really, of dealing with the types of weapons we can construct. Dave Barton is a radar engineer at Raytheon, and that was very important to our study because in the analysis of North Korea, we needed to know radar ranges very accurately. Fred Lamb is an astrophysicist. Ming Lau was at Sandia National Laboratories, and they had been doing, I forget just which phase of it, whether it was the rocket phase or the guidance phase. Harvey Lynch was a accelerator physicist at Stanford, and he knew a great deal about systems analysis, and particularly analyzing the airborne laser. Dave Monckton is a condensed matter physicist. He was the director of the Argonne National Laboratory at the time. Dave Montague, as I indicated, was an advisor, but he knew laser engineering. He was a real expert in laser engineering. David Mosher, who acted as our staff director, was an analyst at the RAND company in Washington. So he knew all about foreign capabilities. Bill Podorsky was, I think, expert particularly on the detection problem of locating the initial signals. Maury Tigner is a very distinguished accelerator physicist at Cornell, and David Vaughan was at RAND, but his expertise was really just in the missile systems. So it's a very capable committee.
I've got a question. Yes, sir.
Hi, Dan. Uh, I'm intrigued about the ability to respond not only just timely but accurately. Uh, just as background, I was with the Air Defense Command in the 1950s
Mhm.
when our job was to intercept bombers from Russia attacking the United States, and we had to intercept them.
Mhm.
And our biggest concern well, one of the concerns was to make damn sure it was a Russian bomber and not a civilian passenger plane that we were taking down.
Yeah.
But the experience that I had was in the early stages. I'm the officer of the day. It's middle of the night. The red phone rings. I pick it up, and I've got a message saying there's an incoming aircraft, and scramble the airplane. And I've never done this before. I'm pretty damn green. I have to have permission from the White House. And if you think I can do that in 3 minutes, you're dreaming. Uh, and it all depended on some young squirt who had no experience in this to make that presidential level decisions that were going on. So now I see that you've got a submarine and you've got it figured out how you can fire from that almost instantaneously.
Mhm.
But the damn thing has to be sitting on top of the water. It can't be, and submarines are designed and cruised below the surface. How in the hell?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the timelines for the submarines, this is a mid-course intercept. So presumably you have 20 or 30 minutes to cause the intercept. So you don't need to make a hair-trigger decision at that time, but they're capable of it. For instance, there are the missiles are kept in compartments in the submarines. Obviously, you have to open that compartment to let the missile fly out. Because of that, the crew, when the submarine is on the surface, the crew is prohibited from walking anywhere in that area because you couldn't give them enough time to get out of there before opening the hatch. I mean, it would open within a few seconds. You can fire from deep underwater. I mean, that was one of the great advances in submarine warfare. And the whole thing, I don't know, maybe a matter of a minute to get off. You wouldn't make that decision yourself, but if you get the decision from, presumably from Washington or some I don't know, outpost, you can respond very quickly. So I don't envy you the position that you are in there, but you know, we have fired planes, we've had planes flying with nuclear tipped warheads on their missiles, and it was the pilot's decision whether or not to fire those. I don't think we do that. I can't give the reference, but I remember reading an article about this, that the firing command is supposed to be the president. You know, there's supposed to be someone with him all times who has the button to press. The president says, press the button. But in fact, in reality, it's always handed down the chain of command. And in this case, it went all the way down to the pilot.
Well, in a sense, we were in the same situation, but we weren't working with nuclear. But if I was, well, I had some experience with the new F-35 planes that are flying. And if you're in the cockpit of that, you're looking at a screen that actually identifies the aircraft that are in the air. What are, you know, are they MiGs, MiG 1, MiG 2? It doesn't tell you what country they're from. But is there any electronic recognition that can make that firing automatic, or at least make the identification accurately before they fire a missile? How do you know it's a missile? How do you know where it's going in that period of time?
Yeah. Well, as I explained, during the boost phase, you're looking down. You're seeing it all the time from a satellite, maybe from a couple of satellites, and you're watching its motion, and you're analyzing its motion. Looking at its motion tells you the ground speed and the direction in which it's moving. So you can rather quickly identify whether it's a threatening azimuth or not. If it is, you just have to say there is an object which has been launched in ballistic orbit and is going to heading for such and such a city. And if you make that decision, then you fire. It's as simple as that. But of course, you really worry about it. There's so many opportunities for mistakes. Right. But you have to rely on a system like that.
Okay, I have a question. It seems like these things are traveling at tremendous speeds. And if you got there just a few milliseconds too early or too late, you would miss your kinetic kill. Did your study look at the probability of them actually colliding?
I mean, that's a very good point. That's certainly the most challenging task of all, is to home in on it. And Dave Montague did a great deal of work on that. Our report shows just how he did it. But he concluded that these things could be fast enough to do it. I myself believed at the beginning that it would just be impossible to really home in on it. So I was rather surprised when he concluded that actually you could. And just how it's done is explained in detail in our report. But yeah, it's quite amazing to be able to. I mean, these things are approaching at sort of thousands of kilometers per hour, and you have to be maneuverable enough to track it no matter what it does. And he concluded that you could. So I just have to refer you to the report to see if it gives you any confidence in the analysis.
First a comment and then a question. The comment is not whether we believe that it will hit the missile. The question is whether the North Koreans believe it will hit the missile. But in terms of the logistics of it, we've had a couple of shoot downs. We shot down a plane coming out of was it Iraq? we shot down a passenger plane, and other countries have shot down. The Iranians shot down a passenger plane of their own when we were threatening to attack them.
Bob Primack here. What we shot down was Iranian.
Iranian. So, and they shot down an Iranian plane too. They shot their own one down. That the decision-making
Yes, they
process
did.
is subject to human, all the foibles of humanity. It's not as easy as just have some, fellow who knows how to fly an airplane make the decision, because we're 0 for 2 so far. So I don't know that that's the greatest strategy, except that you would be shooting something down which you assume would not be an airplane. And whatever it is, if you shot down a dummy rocket, what's the difference? It's just a rocket.
Yeah.
Welcome to the fog of war.
But I mean, that's a really very good point. It's the important thing is that the enemy believes your system can work. It acts then as an effective deterrent. On the other hand, that's assuming that you have a sane enemy.
Well, that's the problem.
Yeah,
See, we felt that the Russians were sane,
It's assuming we're,
yeah,
and that's where it ended.
yeah. But we didn't consider Russia a threat because
Correct.
those guys are smart.
Hey Dan, can you talk about the work that you did on the Boost Phase stuff and the Patriot missile system today? Compare the two or whatever.
Oh, well, the Patriot, the Patriot is a theater missile. Theater is used anywhere for missiles capable of going up to maybe 1,000 kilometers, relatively local. The ICBMs are a different breed. They go much higher and, of course, much further. Now, the Patriot system did eventually work. It is an effective defense system. There was a good deal of confusion about it in the early days, but it has been, I think it's in use now by a number of nations. And for local defense, it's a success. But it doesn't protect us from North Korea.
Dan, what is the difference if the Patriot system is working? What's the difference between how the Patriot system works and how the system that's being deployed or people want to deploy it against the intercontinental ballistic missiles? Why doesn't that work, whereas the Patriot system does work?
Well, the Patriot system is designed for, first of all, relatively slow-moving objects. These local systems don't achieve the speeds of these interceptors. Well, you saw that picture of how big the interceptors are. The missiles you're defending are much smaller than that. They're moving more slowly. You can get good radar information on them almost instantly, and you have a fair amount of time to shoot them. So it's just that the scales of operation, the time scales are just totally different. And it took quite a while to get the Patriot system working.
Yeah.
It's rather difficult to tune up a Boost Phase Intercept System.
Also, with the Patriot missiles, they ran into a problem when countries started to get cruise missiles that could come in at very low angles from the horizon, and they had to make adjustments.
Yeah.
Another thing about the Patriot is that it was, at the very beginning, it was an air defense. It was against aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
And it was then adapted to try and go against missiles. And so that adaptation took quite a while to succeed.
Yep. I do remember one report when it was still not totally perfected. It was a report of achievements that in one era, I think this was defense of Israel from missiles being lobbed by Iran. That it succeeded in bringing down 3 missiles and 2 British airplanes.
I
Don,
believe
go
that
ahead.
I believe that might have been during the Iraq War.
Yeah, okay, during the Iraq War.
Well, after the Persian Gulf War, George H.W. Bush visited Raytheon and Andover and talked about 40 out of 40 or 39 out of 40 kills, and that turned out to be greatly exaggerated.
Yeah,
But since then, you know, the Patriot has gone through a lot of renovations. That the missile is totally different, and the radar is upgraded as well.
Yeah, well, even 39 out of 40, if that one is what Ukraine ended up with, downing a commercial airliner, that's not so good.
John Brown, jump in.
I just wanted, I'm sure this is a silly question for those people in the know, but you're talking about the signature of the light of the target missile. At the beginning, if there's cloud cover, is that a problem?
no, I think you're looking at so many different wavelengths, you can tell. In any case, it goes through that cloud cover in, under a second, really.
Mm.
So you start seeing it pretty quickly. Yeah.
I had a question. This was initiated by the Physics American Physical Society,
Yep.
and you had people from organizations that had security clearances or had worked on some of the classified aspects of this project.
Mm-hmm.
Was that a problem when you presented it to the Missile Defense Agency, that they thought what you guys had come up with should have been classified, or was that not an issue at all?
We were very careful about not using any classified information. That if the information we needed was classified, we figured we could pretty well calculate what it was. For example, the optical sensors for first detecting the missiles, they're very classified. But we had experts on the system who knew about these things, and we felt that we could make very sensible predictions just from unclassified material. The first, the report, the BPI report, the SDI report did have classified information, and the Defense Department sat on it for some time to our frustration, but we felt it's much better not to use any classified information. I think a few of the people did have did have clearance, but I've never had clearance. Fred Lamb has had clearance because he's worked on very many such reports before, but we agreed that we should just keep away from classified information.